Chapter 10. The bride no one would have believed. During the days that followed Mother's funeral, Daddy fell deeper and deeper into his own grave of despair. His eyes remained bleak, dark, haunted. I had never understood how much he loved and needed what I had thought was only her silly little jabber. However, without it, our home became an empty music hall, every sound echoing on the previous. I realized that Mother had created all the real melodies here. Her laughter, her symphonies of gossip filled with funny, inconsequential information about this one or that apparently had provided Daddy with a very necessary contrast and respite from the more serious, dour talk of business. She had been there to greet him with a kiss and a hug, to whirl around him in her newest dress or float her hand under his nostrils to give him a whiff of her latest cologne. He could tolerate her illness because there was always the false hope that stems the flow of nightmares. The belief that something miraculous could still happen, that medicine and science would produce a cure just in time, what Greeks call their deus ex machina, a last-minute device to save the day and restore our world to its balance and health. However, once death came calling, all that hope died with Mother's last breath. In the beginning, right after her funeral, in fact, it was still difficult to believe she was gone. The heavy truth lingered like a persistent storm overhead, the truth sweeping in more deeply each day. Mother was really gone. We were never going to see her again. Even Belinda had trouble reviving herself. She moped about with large teary eyes, took long naps, or just curled up like a baby in her bed and stared at the wall, her thumb against her lips. Her friends called her, but her conversations were far shorter than usual, and none of them came to visit. She discouraged them with her tears and moans of sorrow. None of us had much of an appetite. Dinners were quiet and short. The nightmare continued to shadow our days until I announced I was returning to work. Up until now, Daddy had visited the offices briefly and kept up with important business events over the phone. Our company was holding pattern. No decisions were being made. Everything was languishing. "We've got to get back to full-time work, Daddy," I finally told him one night at dinner. "Mother wouldn't want us to mourn like this any longer. You know how much she hated gray faces and sadness," I said. He nodded. "Olivia's right," Belinda said. "I'm not going to turn down another invitation." "That's not exactly what I meant," I snapped, but she didn't want to hear more. The next day she was off with her friends, returning to the bubblegum club and her unproductive activities. If Daddy had difficulty seeing how wasteful she was before, he was capable of seeing it now. It was almost as if he didn't notice her existence. She needed money. He scribbled out a check and kept his ears from ringing with her pleas. She wanted to stay overnight at some friend's house, go to an all-night party, take a weekend in Boston. He nodded and waved his hand, not even comprehending what she was doing and what he was allowing her to do. I was busy filing for him in the office. When I would report to him, he listened, half an ear, and asked few questions. Samuel visited daily. He tried to revive our lives by bringing the architect around to discuss how we would modernize the old portion of the house. Daddy sat in on some of the meetings, but offered little comment or advice. It did provide a good distraction for me, especially when I fixed the realization that this world would be my home, my own little world for a long, long time. The work began almost immediately, and with it came Samuel's frequent reports of progress. Once a week I would go to the site with him and inspect the construction. Nelson Childs had been right about his predictions about Samuel. Samuel had the foreman hire, more laborers, and the remodeling of the new additions of the house were being completed at twice the paces normally anticipated. It's wonderful, I told him, to pay people time and a half just to get the house in a month or so earlier. Waste is directly related to what makes you happy and unhappy, Samuel replied in an uncharacteristic contradiction to what I had said. I don't consider a nickel wasted if it brings me home to you 1 minute earlier, Olivia. I raised my eyebrows and looked at him. How I wished I had the same intensity, the same desire and longing, and ironically I envied him for how much he seemed to love and want me. Usually it was the woman who was impatient with time that it took to bring her to the altar. All the women I had known didn't have half of the nervousness, the doubt, the insecurity as the men they were about to marry. Men, even though they did the proposing, behaved as if they were the ones who had been hooked and reeled in and not the women. It was as through marriage was the inevitable prison sentence that awaited them all. Nelson behaved this way. Whenever I saw him and inquired as to his wedding plans, he would tell me nothing specific had been concluded yet. He would tell me that was inevitable. And why rush? It wasn't going away, but his impish smile told me what was going away was his freedom. Soon enough he would have to behave appropriately. Why hurry it along? Besides, he explained, the Brannigans had insisted on using High Point House for the wedding reception, and they're still discussing an actual date. The Colonel and his wife were to be the guests of the Brannigans in Boston. They had already a second engagement party with some friends. Years ago, mothers started making embroidery linens for their daughters' torsos. Nowadays, women don't sew or embroider. They spend so much of the time shopping and choosing or buying. Then there are the wedding plans. I swear, Olivia, cabinet meetings in the White House don't go any longer. Sometimes our parents meet on neutral grounds, he quipped. Dad says, luckily, he and my father-in-law have legal training. No, Nelson concluded. 10 more months is barely enough time as it is. I didn't want to tell him I was doing all that myself. You're not anxious then, I asked him. Admittedly, nowhere near as anxious as your fiancé, he told me when he joined up at the house. You have possessed Samuel Logan. Look at him grotting and cheering those laborers to work harder and faster. If he could lash them with a whip, he would. You're not as possessed. I felt like a lobster fisherman dropping traps in the waters. He smiled at me with those beautiful eyes that made my heart go into triple beats. How's your father doing these days, he asked, perhaps to change the subject. He's still not back to work 100%. I'm afraid he'll never be. I'm sorry, he said, but maybe with time. Time doesn't heal scars as most people commonly think. It simply makes them firmer and stiffer. One must accept it and not hope to mend and return to what he or she once was. That's a hard and cold lesson, Olivia, he remarked. That's what the truth is, Nelson, hard and cold most of the time. He stared at me, and I did not shift my gaze. You're gonna run this town one day, he predicted. You're a natural-born leader. You should have been born a man, I finished for him. He shrugged. Sorry, I know that women are supposed to be treated with equal respect these days, but I'm still a bit old-fashioned when it comes to that, I suppose. You're just a typical chauvinistic male, I replied, and he laughed. He held up his hands. Guilty, he declared. Of what? Samuel asked, coming over to join us. Of stereotyping, Nelson explained. Samuel looked from him to me, then shook his head and returned to pointing out changes I had suggested to be made to the historic section of the house. Our wedding date was set with such speed it raised eyebrows. Some even had the audacity to suggest I might be pregnant. Belinda enjoyed the gossip. I did everything I could to end the rumors, but kept the date of our wedding. I was hoping it would bring Daddy around again. Without Mother, he would represent my interests, and I tried putting more decisions and questions on him. Whatever you think is best, Olivia, don't worry about any expense if that's the problem. His eyes suggested I involve Belinda in some wedding planning. A suggestion I didn't take seriously, of course. Belinda had no taste, no real breeding, and no sense of decorum. She would turn my wedding into a garish nightmare if she could. She tried to get me to invite some of her bubblegum club, but I resisted. I'll have no one to talk to at the reception. No one to dance with, please, she pleaded. It's at least invite Kimberly and Bruce and maybe Arnold. It's not a party, it's a wedding, I told her. But I thought the reception was a party. Not the sort of party you attend, I said. In the end, I relented and agreed to let her invite Kimberly and Arnold. Kimberly and I will just have to share him, she moaned. I'm sure none of Samuel's friends or Daddy's business friends will ask me to dance. I won't have a good time, she threatened. It's supposed to be my day, Belinda, not yours. I think you could at least consider that, I lectured. When you get married, I'm going to have a real wedding. I'm going to get Daddy to rent a yacht that holds 150 people, and the wedding will be at sea, and there'll be fireworks and a band and a boat beside the yacht, but playing so loud it won't matter. I can't wait, I said dryly. I can, she said with a laugh. I'm not ready to be someone's wife just yet. I can't stand thinking about being with only one man forever and ever. Ugh, she said, shaking her shoulders as if she was shaking off the cold rain. I don't think a woman should get married until she's at least 40. That's ridiculous, especially if you want to make a family, I said. I don't expect to be a good mother anyway, she told me. It always amazed me how Belinda could face her failings and weaknesses so easily and just as easily accept them. She was beyond feeling unhappy about herself. I despised and envied her for that simultaneously. It embarrassed me to think that we had came from the same mother, yet she probably wouldn't even develop a wrinkle from worry. She would go through life on those damnable bubbles, laughing and content. She proved that in the way she recovered from Mommy's death, returning to her philandering lifestyle and zest. Her wan, pale face of sorrow returned to that which was a radiant visage that caused her to stand out like a vibrant, blossomed rose in the garden full of mediocre flowers. Even Samuel commented about it. The house reverberated with her giggles, her quick footsteps on the stairway, her telephone calls. At times Daddy looked shocked and surprised by her lack of sorrow. However, she was the only thing that brought a small smile back to those pressed tight lips and lifted the weight from his brooding forehead. I began to think she would replace Mother in his eyes. She would restore the music and lightness, and I was actually jealous. For her part, Belinda seemed no longer jealous of the attention of my impending wedding to Samuel continued to bring to our house. She was happy again. I was filled with suspicious and trepidations. Surely, somehow, some way, she would do something that would damage the family's name just before my wedding, I thought. As always, I felt like someone staring up at the ceiling, waiting for the sound of the second shoe to drop. Our wedding wasn't to be held on the yacht as Belinda demanded hers would be, but Samuel surprised me one day with the plans for our honeymoon. "I've rented a yacht for us," he said. "We'll sail down to Hilton Head. What better place to be after our wedding than on the sea? Don't you agree, Olivia?" he asked hopefully. Samuel had come to my office, something he had begun to do more and more as our wedding date drew closer. I had actually been the one to work out the merger of his father's company and ours. It was more like a whale swallowing a minnow. Our appraisers fixed the value just under $1 million for the Logan company, which was mostly tied up in their boats. I negotiated directly with Samuel's father and settled on $750,000 as a value, and then made him take 90% of that in our company's stock. "Oh well," he concluded, "it's all in the family now anyway." Regardless of our marriage, I did not have documents written to that effect. Our financial interests remained separate and clear, but I did agree to give Samuel some manager duties at our company. "One day the wall between us would come down anyway," he said. "I know that's what your father would like." Thinking about Daddy, it was during his dark period of his depression and despair that I worried about his capacity to make the right decisions concerning our company. Consequently, I had my lawyers draw up the documents and wrote the bylaws left me in control. No man, not even my own father, who I now knew to be my stepfather, would send me home to wipe the mouths of babies and change diapers. The sooner Samuel understood that, I thought, the better he and I would be. That's fine with me, I said regarding the yacht, as long as we have good weather. Oh, of course, he replied. It's unique. We're not just going off on some island hotel to languish in the sun. We'll sail and fish and explore together, he admitted. I was too, but I didn't say so. Belinda was my maid of honor, and some of our cousins participated as bridesmaids. The actual event did bring some life back to Daddy. The week of the wedding and the detailing, I began to have my things moved to the house. For a few months I'd been ordering furniture. Most of it had already been delivered and set up. Everyone who visited claimed it would be a show place. Nelson jokingly referred to it as the Cape Cod Castle. He said he even envisioned me building a mound around it someday. To keep the riffraff away, he added. Too bad you won't be able to visit then, Samuel responded, and they both had a good laugh about it. I was beginning to wonder if Nelson had believed I thought too much of myself to ever consider him, not that Samuel was any more special, and not that he'd given me a reason to believe there was a shred of romantic interest. I was simply always looking for a reason why the man I could have loved as passionately as a woman should love a man never gave me a chance, even the chance he had given Belinda. Irony of ironies now. He was to be my future husband's best man and would be at the altar with me, but alas, only to hand Samuel Logan the ring. I wished he himself would put on my finger. We had a spectacular day for a wedding. For the first time in my life, it appeared everything was going picture perfect. Belinda revealed she was jealous of my good fortune. I hope I have a day as beautiful as this when I get married, she said, fluttering around the house, dressing herself, charging in and out of my room to make a suggestion about my hair and my makeup, then rushing back to make some changes on her own hairdo. Anyone would have thought it was her wedding day and not mine. She was far more nervous and finally realized it, pausing as I calmly adjusted my wedding dress bodice. Aren't you excited? She cried. Of course, I said calmly. You don't act it. You act like you're going to some business dinner. You're getting married today. Married! People get married every day. There are probably 50 weddings going on right at this moment, I said dryly. That's a silly thing to say. Nobody's getting married today but you. That's the way you should think. Who cares about anyone else? When I get married, the whole world's gonna know and they're gonna stop and take notice. I bet they will, I said. But she didn't hear my sarcasm. Instead, she continued to flutter about me like a hummingbird until I finally had to tell her to go look at Daddy and stop worrying about me. I swear, Olivia, she said, wagging her head, you've got ice in your veins instead of blood. She ran off to see Daddy, and I gazed at myself in the mirror. Did I have ice in my veins instead of blood? Was there something wrong with me because I wasn't giggling and taking deep breaths to calm my wild nerves? Even the thought of leaving this house didn't affect me deeply, like I anticipated. I had grown up here, dreamed and planned, and had my talks with Mommy. But I was going out that door and getting into a limousine to be driven to a church and become a wife. Where are my tears? I leaned closer to the mirror and inspected my eyes. They were dry, bright, and alert. Hardly the eyes of someone struggling with emotion. "Ready?" I heard, to turn to see Daddy in a tuxedo standing in the doorway. "Today I've got to give away my daughter. You look beautiful, Olivia. Your mother would have loved to see you like this." "Thank you, Daddy. You look handsome and distinguished." "Only for you," he said with a sigh. "Well then, I guess we're about ready. It's time." I gazed at myself one last time and started out. "It's gonna be pretty empty around here with you gone, Olivia," Daddy remarked when he saw my eyes lingered. "I'll be here often, Daddy, you know that. And you'll be at my home too." "I? But I'm not the sort who interferes with other people's lives, especially my daughter's," he had said. "You won't be interfering." He nodded. "Are we going?" we heard Belinda cry frantically. "I haven't done my makeup properly yet." "Do it in the limousine," I said. "You'll still be doing it when I walk down the aisle anyway." Daddy laughed and Belinda moaned and complained, but followed us down the stairs and out the door. Carmelita and Jerome stood by smiling, complimenting me on my appearance. They congratulated Daddy, and we got into the limousine. When we drove back, I glanced back once and focused on the windows. I knew in Mother's bedroom. In my imagination, I saw the curtain part, and she was smiling and threw me a kiss. There were tears of joy, and I sucked my breath and swallowed some small moan and looked out the side of the window at the passing scenery, my mind on nothing at all. Finally, I realized what I was doing. I was so in a daze, I hardly heard Belinda's constant stream of babble, her complaints and worries about how she would look in pictures. She badgered Daddy, drawing complaints from him until she finally appeared satisfied with herself. "Look at all the people," she cried as we approached the church. "I'm as excited as I would be on my own wedding, and I don't even have a steady boyfriend these days." "Would you like to change places with me?" I challenged. She raised her eyebrows, looked at Daddy, and laughed. "Hardly," she said. "I'm going to marry a movie star or a musician, not some boring businessman." "Your father's a businessman," I reminded her. "That's different," she said, gazing at me with that sweet, flirtatious little smile. "He's my father." She said it firmly, almost as if she had known he wasn't mine. As Daddy escorted me down the aisle, some of the people who looked at me from their pews still wore faces of disbelief. Even the sight of me in my wedding gown, the organ playing, the minister waiting at the altar with Samuel and Nelson standing by, both looking handsome and distinguished, the mountains of flowers, the bridesmaids, none of it wiped the incredulous looks off their skeptical faces. I could see the questions and hear the gossip. How did Olivia Gordon win the heart of a man as handsome as Samuel Logan? Did her father buy her husband? Green eyes of young unattached women still waiting for their dream lover to come with perfect husbands glared at me. I gazed straight ahead, defiant and secure. Nelson wore an impish grin on his lips as I stepped up to the altar. Samuel was beaming, his shoulders straight, his chest out. The Gus fell into a hush as the minister began the ceremony. As I recited my vows, I let my eyes shift so I could see Nelson standing there, and I fantasized for a moment that it was he and not Samuel I was marrying. When he handed Samuel the wedding ring, he leaned over to give me a kiss on the cheek. It wasn't part of the rehearsal. I heard a few gasps behind me and my heart jumped and fluttered and a hot flush stung my face. Samuel didn't appear to notice, or if he did, he thought it was him who had gave me that excitement. The exchange of rings occurred and the words were spoken. I kept my eyes closed so I could imagine it was Nelson giving me my wedding kiss. Then we hurried up the aisle as children and some adults rained rice over us. We got in the limousine quickly and we were rushed away to prepare for our wedding reception. Samuel looked so happy. His eyes were like two small bulbs full of brightness and joy. "Well, Mrs. Logan," he declared, "I'll bet all this feels like a dream to you." "Yes," I admitted, "it does." "Shall I pinch you?" "No, Samuel, that's quite all right. I'll pinch myself if I feel need," I said, and he laughed and threw his arm around me, drawing me closer to him. I closed my eyes, and for the first time I wondered if I could really be a wife. The reception was elegant and gay. I couldn't imagine how the months and months of planning Nelson's and his fiancée's parents were taking would have made much better. The caterers did a wonderful job. The decorators had turned the room into a wonderland of flowers and glitter. Our orchestra played well. It was at least as nice as Nelson's engagement party. Whenever anybody complimented, Samuel turned to me and gave me all the credit. "She's the one," he said, "who planned it all. I've been busy working on the house." "There's not a more competent woman in all New England," he declared. "You couldn't ask for a more loyal subject," Nelson kidded me when he overheard Samuel commending me. "I could ask for you," I shot back, and he widened his eyes and laughed and performed an emphatic European bow. "No need to ask, madame. I shall always be a loyal subject," he declared, and once again asked me to dance while his fiancée was occupied. However, I do now need to ask Samuel's permission. "You are his wife," he said, and turned to Samuel. "I am his wife, but I'm still an individual," I interrupted. Nelson looked at Samuel, who was already distracted by conversation, and shrugged and held out his arms, into which I gladly went. In my mind, we floated on that dance floor. However, when I opened my eyes and looked to the right, I saw Belinda staring at us and smiling. Instantly, I stiffened. Later, before Samuel and I left for the yacht, Belinda came up to me and whispered in my ear, "Maybe you got married too fast, Olivia. Maybe there was still a chance." "Whatever are you talking about, Belinda? I'm sure it's something silly," I added. "Just look at Daddy while I'm away. You have more responsibilities at the house now." "What?" she snapped. "We still have Carmelita and Jerome." I'm not talking about daily chores. I'm talking about looking after Daddy." "Daddies have to look after their daughters, not daughters after daddies," she's saying. "Have a fun time on your boat, Olivia, and tell me everything when you return." She hugged me and then flew off to dance with Arnold. "Ready?" Samuel asked. "Yes, I just want to say goodbye to my father," I said, gazing after Belinda. She was batting her eyes at Nelson now. I saw him hide a smile. I pulled Daddy away from his conversation to tell him I was leaving. "You look absolutely beautiful in the church today, Olivia. Your mother would have been proud." "Thanks, Daddy. Have a wonderful honeymoon and don't worry about a thing back here." "I'll be fine and the business will be fine." "I hope so, Daddy. I said, gazing at Belinda again. She was drinking too much champagne, and I mentioned it to Daddy. It'll be all right, Daddy assured me. I'll keep my eye on her, he muttered. We hugged, and I gave my hand to Samuel. The limousine took us to the dock where our yacht and crew waited. This idea looks better and better to me, Olivia, Samuel said as we boarded and were directed to our cabin. After something like that, it's good to go off on our own and have nothing but the sea, eh? Yes, Samuel, I said. I did think it was a good idea. Let's change and go aft to watch the shoreline disappear. He suggested and started to take off his tuxedo. He was about to undress in front of me, and he expected I would do the same, but I wasn't ready. I found what I wanted to wear and went to the bathroom to change. I like that, he said when I came out. Modesty makes the promise of our intimacy that much more special, he declared. Then he smiled. From now on, my dear Olivia, we will have nothing to hide from each other, least of all our bodies. I tried to smile too, but my heart was pounding too hard and fast. Maybe Belinda was right. Maybe she was better off preparing herself for this sort of day. Samuel took my hand and led me to the deck, where we sat on lawn chairs and were waited upon by a crew member. So we're going off to sea and truly for a new life. We drank some wine and watched the sun go down. Tired, he asked. Yes, it's been quite a day. An exciting day, and I'm very happy, Olivia. I promise I'll be a good husband and father, he laughed. I know if I stray an inch, you'll let me know, too. Whatever you do, you should do because you want to do it, Samuel, not because I might get angry. Of course, he said. He leaned over and kissed me on the cheek. Shall we go to bed, my darling, Miss Logan? I took a deep breath and gazed at the first visible star and nodded. We went below to our cabin. As soon as we entered, Samuel turned me to him and kissed me full on the lips, his arms around my waist. He held me so long I had to protest that I couldn't breathe. Sorry, he said. I'm just excited. I've waited a long time for this day. A long time, hardly. A long time, Samuel. Look how long Nelson's waiting to get married. Oh, he said, laughing. Nelson's been on his honeymoon already, I assure you. You always wanted us to wait, so here we are waiting. Shall I help you? He asked, bringing his fingers to the buttons of my blouse. No, I can do it myself, I said. Let's put out the light. He laughed and turned off the lanterns before he pulled off his sweater. Even in the darkness, I turned my back and began to undress. My fingers trembling so much, I thought maybe I should have let him help me. Maybe that would make it easier. Yes, I concluded. I pulled the blanket back and lay down, still dressed. Samuel was in his underpants already. What are you doing? He asked when he crawled in beside me and realized I still had all my clothes. Waiting. I've changed my mind, I said. Undress me. I ordered as he were my valet. Gladly, he said. I kept my eyes closed as he unzipped my skirt and slid it down my legs. I didn't open my eyes until I was naked and he pressed himself to me, his breathing heavy, his mouth nudging my breasts with his kisses. He moaned and nibbled gently at me, and when he lowered his mouth to my stomach, I gasped. There was a rush of excitement in me I had only imagined before. Olivia, he said, my own Mrs. Logan. He was between my legs, his firm hardness tapping and moving into me. I tried to swallow my cries. It was actually painful, but I was afraid to reveal it. I didn't have to. He knew. As I expected, he said, a virgin? Thank you for saving yourself for me, he added. as if I had known him all of my mature life and I made some ridiculous love pledge. He laughed and moved harder, faster, shaking and rocking the bed so hard the bedboard banged against the wall. "Samuel," I cried, "the crew. They don't have their ears through these walls, don't worry. They've all been here before, I'm sure. They know what happens on a wedding night." Men, I thought, could be so crass, even at this moment, even something was supposed to be one of the most beautiful, special things of the life. The pain continued to overdo the pleasure for me, but I kept it all subdued, my eyes shut tight. My whole body was like a clenched fist. "Relax, Mrs. Logan," Samuel chanted. "Relax and enjoy. I promise it'll be better and better," he said. When he spent himself, he turned over and lay beside me, panting, his chest rising and falling. "Good," he muttered, "good." I curled up and pulled the blanket closer to my face. Then I felt his hand over the small of my back. "Are you all right, Mrs. Logan?" "Yes, just very tired," I said. "Me too. Marriage," he declared with a laugh, "is more exhausting than I thought." We were both silent for a while. "Listen to the sound of the water against the hull," Samuel said. "Isn't that a sweet lullaby, Olivia?" Yes. The boat sliced through the water, cutting the way of the old world I had known and exposing the new. What sort of journey had I begun, I wondered. I fell asleep dreaming I had taken the rudder and I was guiding the ship through the purple night. There was no one else on board. I thought I heard Belinda's silly laughter coming over the darkness and then Mother singing off in the distance. I steered in her direction, but there was no one there. It grew even darker. The boat tossed and fell against the waves. Then there was a small light ahead. As I approached, it grew larger, brighter, and soon it became Nelson Childs' smile. I sailed right through him as if he were a ghost, and then turned back frantically as he dwindled behind me and disappeared. Ahead there was only more darkness.